we're going to be looking at analysis of foodborne data. So we're going to, rather than simulating data now, we're going to look at some real data. And we'll do it in a Shiny app that I've developed. So this is a very basic epidemiological study, and it's really just to give you an insight into interpreting the results and solving a problem in a very straightforward epidemiological framework. I didn't quite get to the end of finishing that slide for some reason. But we've got this basic study design, participants, exposed and unexposed, and then we wait until they have outcomes. And I've shown you this cartoon. Now, I'm not sure if you can see the small type here, but we've talked about epidemiology is really part of science, and you've got to think about the big picture. And when we've got a foodborne outbreak, we're thinking, what are the various possibilities here? And does anyone know some bugs that can cause foodborne outbreaks? Has anyone had food poisoning? No one had food poisoning? No one want to own up to having food poisoning? Man, I've had it several times, particularly when I visit low-income countries and eat out. Boy, yeah, you guys are lucky. Nobody wants to own up to ever having food poisoning, and you guys are very lucky. Certainly had it quite some. I did my medical elective in Cameroon, and every time I ate outside of the hospital, I was very violently ill, and yeah. Luckily, it was a couple of times it was treatable, which was nice. There's some bugs like Giardia, and the one I had was Entamoeba histolytica, which doesn't actually exist in New Zealand. It's one of those things that we've got rid of. And anyway, the local guy was just so happy to see it down the microscope and give me some metronidazole, and it was like turning off the tap. As soon as I got the pill, it was finished. It was so good. I'll never forget that. If you ever get Entamoeba histolytica, you need some metronidazole. Okay, so now the thing with foodborne illness is that we're thinking about, we've had an outbreak. It's at a wedding, it's at a funeral, it's at a hotel, it's maybe at a kebab bar. Don't want to pick on kebabs, but you know, the way that they cut the cooked meat and it sort of spills down, and then you got fresh meat and it's dripping on the cooked meat. It's just not a good thing for food safety, I'm afraid, as much as I love kebabs. I'm a big kebab fan. But anyway, there's only a certain number of bugs which cause foodborne illness, and these are all known, and there's not a lot to discover in this area. You know, we've given it a good flogging. So there's Campylobacter, and we know that Campylobacter is often associated with chicken. There's Clostridium, and there's various other things. Bacillus cereus, that causes Chinese restaurant syndrome. Has anyone had Chinese restaurant syndrome? That's usually you get some steamed rice, and you have a couple of bouts of diarrhea and then it's gone. And you feel terrible for a bit and then it's kind of all gone. It's usually 6 to 8 hours. Anyway, there's two main categories. There's the toxins and there's the bacteria and the viruses. And the toxins, they come on, you get the symptoms within about 6 hours. Very short onset because they're already, the bugs have kind of made this this chemical in the food. And so it doesn't take long. It's kind of almost immediate, 6 hours. And you feel rotten and you have a couple of squirts and it's all gone. Sometimes you vomit. It's often when the Chinese kind of fried rice kind of stuff, where you get hot oil spitting on the hands of the cooks, and these wounds get infected and they get staph toxin, and you can get vomiting right after your meal, and you feel rotten, and a couple of hours and it's gone. Mostly that's dealt with now, I think. But the other common one is norovirus. Has anyone heard of norovirus? Oh man, you guys haven't been in public health for that long. Norovirus keeps public health people employed. It's scout jamborees, cruise ships, rest homes, norovirus, even the hospital. It's super infectious. Just one virus will do it. It's got an incubation period of about a couple of days, so it's not always obvious what's actually what you've eaten, which has led to that. And it causes both diarrhea and vomiting. So there's other bugs which cause mainly diarrhea, which is sort of, from the large intestine. And there's some bugs which cause mainly vomiting, which is from the upper GI tract. But I mean, this is all sort of just to give you the picture that there's several different bugs that can cause food poisoning. And it's a bit like the kid with the shape sorter. That's why I've got the little picture there. So you've got these possibilities and you're looking for the evidence that you're collecting to see which bug, which shape fits with which hole. And if the data fits a certain bug, then it's likely to be that. And sometimes you actually get some microbiological data, like somebody has a stool sample and it grows a certain bug, and then that adds to the picture that you've got from your epidemiology, from your questionnaires. So let's just keep going. So how do we distinguish the cause of outbreaks? I've talked a bit about incubation period. So how long from the meal to getting the symptoms? That's the time that, what we call the incubation period, the time that the bug needs to grow and to produce the symptoms. So toxins are usually less than 24 hours, norovirus 24 to 48, and 3 days bacteria or some other viruses. And what are the symptoms? Usually vomiting, diarrhea. Okay, so what happens in a public health unit if you have a job and your job is to analyze the data? And then what sort of steps happen? I wrote this slide quite a while ago, so it's a bit different now. First of all, you form an outbreak group, track down the participants, try and track down the food, try and get some samples. So if people are still sick, then you send them out a stool specimen pot and get them to do the business into the pot. send it off to the lab for some lucky lab technician to have a look at and grow various bugs. Sometimes you do need immediate action because there's certain I'm being a bit lighthearted about gastro, but there's certain types of gastro bugs that are actually quite important that can cause renal failure, can cause premature death. So sometimes if it's one of those really serious bugs, then you've really got to think about, okay, we might have to take some action. We might have to get out into the media and say, anyone been to this kebab bar? Get your stool checked. Okay, so it's just like any other area of epidemiology. You've got to have your hypothesis. Was the outbreak caused by food served at a certain function? And if so, which food was it? And we get complementary, that's the really fun part of doing these analyses, is that you get information from the clinical side, so the symptoms that they report. That gives you a clue whether it's an upper GI bug or a lower GI bug. Are they vomiting, or is it mainly diarrhea? Is it bloody diarrhea? So that helps you find the shape to put in the hole or find the bug to write in your report. And sometimes you get the microbiological sample, which gives you a clear-cut answer. But sometimes you don't, and sometimes it's only the epidemiology. So let's have a look at this particular example. This was an example that I think was the first outbreak I was involved with. It was a very large one. The South African Indian community had all converged on the North Shore. And they'd had a week-long soccer tournament, and they'd had a dance at the end of the soccer tournament. And one of the ladies in the community had volunteered to cater, and these were the dishes: dal, vegetarian biryani, and lamb biryani. Has anyone had those dishes?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what goes into them?
Depends. They're all different, but
Well, I guess the lamb one has a bit of lamb in it.
yeah.
They've got a bit of chickpeas or something. Is it dal's made out of chickpeas? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And there's a few spices in there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
Do you know what sort of spices go in?
I think just what you can see there, like some chilies, some coriander, some
Okay,
along those lines.
okay, okay. Some people may not know this, but some spices actually come from developing countries, and human feces is used to fertilize some spices in some countries. And so some of these spices can be contaminated. Sometimes they are irradiated to reduce the contamination. Sometimes they're not. Anyway, that's just an aside. It's useful to know a little bit about what ingredients went into the food. Does anyone, this was a photo from the food premises. So often you do a little investigation to see how the food was prepared, because it can give you a few clues. It's a bit like being Sherlock Holmes. You got to look at all the various clues here about what went on. Does anyone know, think of some issues that might have arisen from that type of cooking, that stuff that you can see there, these massive saucepans? Are there any sort of issues with food safety that arise if you got a massive, massive saucepan?
is it kind of like making sure everything's cooked through? If you've kind of got lots of stuff, you might not have everything kind of on the bottom at equal cooking temperature. So some might be well cooked, some might be undercooked.
Yep, yep. And in fact, the major, well, that's kind of a mixing problem, I suppose. But thanks, Scott. The major problem actually is the cooling and the time it takes to get everything up to temperature, and then the time it takes to cool everything. So with a little saucepan, it's just, you know, if you got induction hob or gas or whatever, just boom, you know, you turn it on and it's bubbling. Whereas for this sort of thing, with a gas burner, you know, this could take hours to get up to temperature. And bugs really love that sort of intermediate temperature, sort of 36, 37, 40. And so you're giving the bugs, basically you're inviting them to a party. And similarly on the way down, like even if you get it up to temperature, there's some very clever bugs which are called spore forming bugs, and they can sort of make a waxy coat which will allow them to survive in a boiled environment. And so when they come down from that high temperature, they get out of their waxy coat and they start to reproduce like crazy. And if they're given enough time, what we call, in the trade, they call it time and temperature abuse. So if it's lukewarm and it's for long enough, that's really basically like saying, bug, really go for it. So if there's some contaminated ingredients that were there already, and I suggested earlier how that could be, then you're really inviting those ingredients, whatever's in those ingredients, to go for it. So these sorts of things, if you see them in the investigation, you can be, you know, it sort of raises the red flags that time and temperature abuse is part of it. Does anyone know what one of these things is? You might see it down at the walk, not far from the med school. Some of you guys might get your lunch there. Who knows? You know what this thing's what this thing's called?
Is it a bain marie?
Yes, yeah, no, well done. So the idea with it is that it's got water, and it's kept up to a certain temperature, and it keeps food at a certain temperature. And you've got to have some fairly close monitoring of that. And if you want the food to be kept at a temperature that's not going to allow the bugs to have a party. And also if you've got a lot of people getting food out of the same bain marie, it may not be heated up properly to the right temperature before it's served. So it might be cool. So anyway, let's analyze some data with this app. So the app's on the web and you can jump on it, and that's what we're using in public health at the moment. Let me just switch my screen that I'm sharing. And so can you see my browser? I've put the data for this in the modules tab just here. So if you can download it, you should be able to follow along. I'll just put it in my downloads box. Okay, so you can open it up in Excel. But we're going to open it up in this. And this, I quite like it because, well, I wrote it, so I know how it works. But also it takes you through all the steps that I would normally do in a data analysis. So it kind of forces you to do all the things that I would do. And when I started working in public health, I had terrible trouble with duplicates and missing data and all those sorts of things. People just, the culture in the organization was that they didn't look at it, at those issues. And so I managed to, by building this app, I helped people sort of go through the motions of doing things that I would do. So here you can see all the data that we've got, and this is real data. Questionnaire, so you got about 150 people here. We've got the case, which is usually just whether they've got diarrhea or not after the event. You've got the onset time, so this is useful for calculating the incubation period. You've got the symptoms here, so that you can tell what sort of, you can look at the proportion of people who get each symptom, and that can give you a clue as to which bug you're dealing with. Whether they went to the doctor or the hospital, just in case you want to get some more information. And then you got your various different exposures. And here I was saying it's just lamb biryani, vegetable biryani and dal, but there was also a bit of salad, ice cream and crackers. But they weren't contaminated, so I forgot about those. There's also water, beer, wine and spirits. But the ones that come from the factory, unlikely to be contaminated, because if they were, there'd be this big widespread contamination, wouldn't there? Because from the factory, it's going all over the place. It's more likely to be the things which are prepared in those suspicious looking pots. Okay, so I kind of take you along the analysis just by going along these tabs up the top. And so first of all, we can look for duplicates. I'm big on duplicates. My holy trinity of things to look for when you get a new data set is, one is duplicates. Number two, what's number two?
Range.
Yeah, range. And number three?
Missing values.
Missing values, excellent. Yeah. So we've got a duplicate, number three, and we can have a look here. We got number three here, and we got number three here as well. And we can look and see, yeah, they're all the same values. So it looks like that's a true duplicate. So we've got to go back to our original data. And so I'm going to just open this in Excel, open the data in Excel. Hang on. So we can find the duplicate here, number three, and delete. and save. And we can re-upload. And when we look for duplicates this time, fingers crossed, no duplicates. Woohoo, we've solved the duplicate problem. And in terms of ranges, if you look right down here, actually, you can hit the head and it'll just show you the first few observations. Hang on, I think I need to show you what I'm doing again. Okay. And you can see the minimum and the maximum. So really, it's a bit hard for the categorical variables. You just want to know number of categories. That's okay. 2 and 3, somehow they coded 2 and 3. I don't quite understand that. I think it should work anyway. Age here, you can see the minimum age 12 years, maximum age 72. So that's all plausible, at least. You're not going to be reporting 300-year-olds, so that's good. Duration of illness, 0.1 is the minimum, 2.5 is the maximum. So that's okay, yeah. Minimum 0.1, so that's 0.1 of an hour, I suppose. It's very short. Maximum was 2 hours. So does that, we can already start narrowing down some of the possibilities. This is a very short duration illness. This is not Campylobacter, not Salmonella, not Shigella, and not norovirus. It hasn't lasted for at least a day or so. So what sort of bugs are we thinking about? What sort of, anyone remember the various possibilities, shapes that we can put in the shape sorter here?
Was it like Bacillus cereus?
Yeah, Bacillus cereus, the toxin-mediated illnesses with this really short duration. That's looking quite likely. Okay, so we've done our duplicates. This is what I use to visualize missing data. So these plots will show you the most missing over on the left. So here you got duration. We've got 2/3 missing. That's a bit tricky. And there's quite a bit of missing data for the doctors and the symptoms. Does anyone know why that might be? Why might there be missing data for duration of illness in about half of these?
Is it because people didn't get sick, so they don't report any hours of being ill?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you don't get sick, then you don't generally bother answering some parts of the questionnaire, like what sort of symptoms did you have and how long were you sick? And so this is kind of what I would call expected missing data. It's not unexpected. That's okay. There's a bit of unexpected missing data over here where for some of them, the exposures, they haven't answered it. Now, gender, I don't know why that's missing. That's a bit unusual. But this is quite a common pattern. And importantly, for the ones that we really want to know about, case, lamb biryani, and dal, we see that it's complete, so that's good. So this is where all the action happens. This is where you got to get stuff right. And so case variable, we want to select the case as yes. And for the exposure variables, we've got to select the appropriate coding. The computer's a bit dumb. It's just picked up the character variables. It's obviously not male and female, but no and yes kind of makes sense. And that switches on all the variables that are no and yes. Now, these symptoms are not relevant, but lamb biryani is quite relevant. Vegetarian biryani is relevant. Dal's relevant. Salad's relevant. Ice cream, cheese and crackers and water. So you just tick the boxes there and bingo, we're away. And we've got you want to select the exposed category. If you select the unexposed, it's going to actually give you the wrong answer. It's going to give you those foods which were protective are going to have the strongest association rather than the ones that actually the strongest associated with disease. So you've got to get these things round the right way. If you get them round the wrong way, then it gives you the wrong answer. Okay, so we want cases, yes, exposed category, yes, and then it gives us our 2x2 table here, just in a link, so we've got exposed cases, exposed non-cases, unexposed cases, unexposed non-cases. We got our odds ratio, 95% confidence interval, so we don't have to do that painful calculation that we did in Excel beforehand. Got our p-value, and we even got population attributable risk. Have you guys come across that yet? Can you tell me, Vasco, what's population attributable risk?
I kind of forgot what it was, but I think it's the amount of. Oh, yeah, I'm not quite sure anymore. Sorry, I'm getting confused.
Okay, Samantha, do you remember?
I think it had something to do with the incidents, but I'm not too sure exactly what.
Okay. Anyone else out there know what population attributable risk is? It's one of those really ugly ones, but it's very helpful here because it's an estimate. If you assume that this exposure is causal, it tells you if we took it away, what proportion of cases would be removed, or what proportion of cases would be expected to be attributable to that exposure. So if we took away the lamb biryani, for example, we would expect about 70% of cases to disappear. Now, we got a odds ratio, a relative risk of 3, odds ratio of 5. This program sorts the odds ratio by the strength of association. So we've got very strong association for the lamb. For the dal, 3. I've got a race on here because we're just about out of time. 3, ice cream. So the dal is statistically significant. Lamb biryani is not statistically significant, but very strongly associated. And the two of them really have account for the lion's share. So the dal and the lamb biryani are looking pretty suspicious. We can also estimate the incubation period. Hang on, that's not the right one. It's the onset date and time. Here we go. And we can, this is what we call in the trade, we call it an epicurve. It's just a histogram of the time of onset. And we can see that the mean date of onset here is the 7th of October in the morning. And the food was served 12 hours beforehand. So that tells us the incubation period's about 12 hours. And that goes with the story of that goes with the story of the toxin, which also goes with the duration that we noticed. And we can also look at the cases and look at their symptoms. Oh, not that one. Bloody diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, fever. And we can see that cases generally had diarrhea, not a lot of bloody diarrhea, little bit of nausea, no vomiting, bit of fever, little fever. And the duration was about an hour. So this all adds up to a lower bowel toxin. So if you've been around this game for a bit, you'd know that Clostridium perfringens is a toxin-mediated thing that can cause this sort of thing, and also Bacillus cereus. So just going back to the PowerPoint, let me just... we actually got the microbiology, and it came back with both Clostridium and Bacillus. And the spices had Bacillus. So it was really looking like Bacillus here. We thought basically that turmeric had seeded the dal with a Bacillus cereus that was in the ingredients, the spices, the turmeric, and that it had caused, with the time and temperature abuse, it had led to the contamination of the dal and the lamb biryani. And the vegetarian biryani was actually protective. If you look at the odds ratio, you get an odds ratio less than 1. And when you look at the numbers, most of them were eating the meat, and it was likely that the turnover in the bain-marie was low for the vegetable group, so it would have been heated through, and that would have inactivated the toxin. So being a vegetarian was a very good thing at this particular event. And this is putting it all together. So the vegetarian dish, even though it was possibly contaminated, was heated because there's only a few people eating it. Whereas the lamb dish was likely to be relatively cold, not heated through because everyone was eating it. And that was kind of the explanation. There's a bit about public health action. Is routinely contaminated turmeric okay? I think it actually met the guidelines despite the contamination. So that's an interesting thing to quibble over. The cook can be charged under the food regulations for, if they charge money for food, there's a legal responsibility that it's not contaminated, so you can take them to court. In this thing, it was a bit sort of casual, so we didn't actually take them to court. But then when I was leaving, I think the same person was responsible for another outbreak, so I think they were thinking about getting some legal action at that point. So with these sorts of studies, you get the epidemiology is very useful to determine the cause. Often pinpoints a particular food, as it did here. And there's often large effects but low power. So I think that's what happened. We had a very strong association, but because of the relatively small numbers, it wasn't statistically significant. It was probably a type 2 error. And yeah. Any questions about all that? I hope that's an interesting little story about the application of epidemiology, how it's used in a very simple way. We don't have to worry about confounding, because if you eat, you get sick. There's no additional factors to take into account. So it's quite it's a good little exercise to cut your teeth on, I found. I was going to give you this one for first assignment, but half the school being sort of not epidemiologists, they thought that I was putting too much epidemiology in there, so they're unhappy with that. So you got to blame the rest of the school for not having an easy assignment using my app. But hopefully it gives you a flavour for how you do an analysis, the sorts of steps that you go through, how to interpret the results. Yeah. All right, guys. Any other questions, queries about any of that? You'll probably look behind the counter at the kebab bar next time you go. Yeah, when I see that dripping red meat, you know, after they sort of cut it, and then the red meat kind of drips down, the blood drips down from the uncooked meat, and oh, that could be going to Auckland Regional Public Health. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. All right. Okay. Well, we'll stop there, and we'll see you on Monday. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Simon.
Simon.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you.